then. All right.
Okay.
I know. You ain't even wasting no time with the intros.
Right.
You ready, man?
Okay. Hi, this is Ralph Baker and Torian Mitchell. This is Trump and the global economy, where we discuss the president's policies and how they affect the economy and the community. A couple of weeks ago, President Biden went to visit Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It made a lot of headlines, and something that's known to a lot of African Americans. The story, people my age, I'm not sure it's known to a lot of young people or the dominant society. So I think it was probably a big deal that President Biden went to visit and to pay his respects to the area. And today we're going to discuss was it fruitful or was it simply a PR stunt? So so I'll let Torian start. What do you think about the president's remarks and the trip to Black Wall Street?
Yeah, it's a lot, right? Even which I'm sure we'll probably get into later. But even the fact that was it today, either today or yesterday, within the last 48 hours, Biden finally agreed to student loan forgiveness. Um, which was a part of the, I guess, the actions that he mentioned during his speech. When he visited Tulsa. Um, the cynic in me immediately wants to say it's a PR stunt, simply because leading up to, well, not even just um, leading up to the, most recent presidential election, but just looking at his actions overall. Something that just personally I've been thinking a lot about lately is, do we give folks room enough to grow over time? Cancel culture has been a hot topic. Like the effects of cancel culture has been a hot topic. In the last few weeks, few months. So yeah, it just kind of had me thinking. Do we give people room to learn from their mistakes, learn from their past actions, or maybe they don't even see it as a mistake, but just a different way of thinking, and they've got new information, and they've learned from that new information and decided to take a different position and perspective. And I think, thinking about that with Biden as well, because this man has spent 48 years within the government office in some way, shape, or capacity. So, with that being said, when we look back at his past, really beginning from the 70s into the 80s, well into the 90s, this man has had a hand in mass incarceration, not just from the '94 crime bill, but even dating back when Reagan was in office. So looking at '88 as well as '91, he's had a heavy hand in it. Uh, so it's hard for me to ignore. In other words, all of that to say, um, this man's actions. He's had a heavy role in the over policing of Black communities. He's had a heavy role in the over incarceration of Black communities. He's had a heavy role in the unequal judicial outcomes of Black people over the last 30 plus years. We can't ignore that. Uh, so now we fast forward to 2021, and he's commemorating Tulsa. We have to look at both sides of the coin. Like, is this a change direction? Well, when I look at that, just kind of ignoring or dampening the cynic in me to try to get to a clear and objective, conclusion. I still lean to the side of the cynic in me to say that it really is a PR stunt. And the reason I say that is because he took the time to outline his measures. Presumably over the course of his administration, and one of those is the MBE contracts. So, for folks that aren't aware, MBE, which is minority in some sections of the country, is MDBA or MWBE, like New York, California, for example. Overall, the M stands for minority. If you have a D in it, such as the MBD or the MDBA agency, as minority disadvantaged business agency or association, depending on where you are. However, this is the result. This agency is a result of Civil Rights Act that happened in 64, 65, allowed Black-owned businesses and Black-owned businesses. So let's be very clear, because that's a part of my point, that this blanket term is not exclusive to Black people. It is every non-male, even white women. And as we, as the record shows, that white women were the largest benefactors of affirmative action. So targeting or allocating funds, federal funds, to allocate to more MBE contracts is not a real, it's not a real policy that targets the Black community. Like that's just what it is. It's not something that, to me, says this is an individual that has looked at the last 30 to 40 years of actions he's taken, of disgusting words that he said, dating back to his time rubbing elbows with Strom Thurmond, strong segregationists and open white nationalists and racists. He said some disgusting things about our community over these past couple decades. And I know a lot of folks want to give room to forgive, and I agree with that when someone is showing some true sincerity, because they've learned, because they've got new information, then I think we should allow folks to grow from that. But proof is in the pudding, as we say. And looking at these policies, I see the same shucking and jiving, frankly. There is no, there aren't any recommendations that I see in there, including the education, including making education more equitable. What does that mean for our community? For example, even with the loan forgiveness, while that's great, I'm not going to ignore the impact of the loan forgiveness. A quarter, at least according to, I believe, New York Times or CNBC, but according to record, that 25% of the racial wealth gap is attributed to the cost of tertiary education. What's even higher within the Black community is the amount of Black folks that will have student debt but no degree to show for it, meaning that they've made it through 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, maybe even a fourth year, but the point is they had to leave. And typically the reasons that most folks drop out of college are due to finances. So now you have this surmounting debt. You get right into the workforce, and as anyone that has taken out knows, that the moment that you leave college, you enter the workforce, the deferment on those student loans goes away. Student loan is going to call you and say, hey, can you pay this? Can you pay this? Right. Oh, you're working. Great. So let's schedule a payment for you. So in other words, so the long and short is that it's definitely going to impact our community to have student loan forgiveness, but it still does not drill down to the fact that when we look at the median black wealth and net worth within this country, we're looking at a 10 to 17 times difference between our white and Asian and counterparts. So we have a smaller, essentially smaller income, smaller net worth to start with, and larger debt. In fact, I believe it was Washington Post that did looked at the amount of debt that a student will leave with, and it's something like 30 to 35% higher, and that's even accounting for those that don't graduate when compared to their white counterparts. So, while median white family will take out essentially a lower amount of financial aid and take on a lower amount of student loan debt and have a higher household wealth or higher net worth, which speaks to why they take out less in the first place and walk away with significantly less student debt. So in other words, that speaks to the issue, not just the student loan itself. The student loan and the amount that has to be taken is simply the consequence. That's the outcome, but it's not the root of the problem. So looking at the policy rollouts, I'm not really seeing anything in there that speaks specifically to the Black community. I don't see anything there that, is advocating a policy, not only of protection, much the same, we talked about, the U.S. has never had an anti-Black hate bill. We've never had any, we've never had any policies like the AAPI.
If you had one, could you enforce it?
Well, there you go. But at least you would have a leg.
It's
to
like
stand
having a
on,
bill that
right?
says the sun can't rise in the east, right?
Yeah, right.
You can't really enforce it.
Well, but we're seeing federal allocations as a result of the AAPI hate crime bill. That's the difference, is that we are seeing, all the way from the executive order, which was the beginning format, into a bill, into a law. So even beginning from the executive order format that Biden wrote in his first 30 days, excuse me, we're already seeing a rollout within federal agencies, within local police agencies. New York, NYPD now has an NYPD anti-Asian hate crime department. So they now have, right, and they actually tweet it out. They tweet, they interact. So on social media, you can literally find them. So anytime you see a lot of these videos circulating of some horrendous and sickening violence against folks of Asian descent, they will tweet out. They'll retweet it, especially if it's something that in New York. So in other words, there are resources, real resources that are being allocated and are being enforced. So we see the impact of it. And, frankly, as a result, any violence from a non-Asian onto an Asian person, because of this now law, the question immediately becomes, is this racially motivated? Why? Because now, if it is, it becomes a federal issue. And immediately the charges are brought up on a federal level. So while, it doesn't necessarily the violence, but it certainly helps curb it. It certainly helps the Asian community rally around the judicial outcomes and the enforcement of it because they have a law that rightfully backs them. You know, they should have that law. But my point is that we should have it too. And frankly, you know, it almost sounds a bit childish, but we were here first. But you know, the reality is, yeah, you know, no other demographic, zero, zilch, not even close. No other demographic was brought here through forced labor, went through chattel slavery, went through Jim Crow laws, went through the denial of FHA loans, redlining, mass incarceration, except like no other community, none. So, you know, the point, I think the point is clear that, in other words, these policies are just simply universal policies. They affect 90% of the country. Even a white male who has who as disadvantaged, and they can identify a descriptor that puts them at a disadvantage, such as disabled, for example. So if a white male who is a part of the majority, who would otherwise not be included within the grouping of minority, if that white male is disabled, well, guess what? Now he gets to be a part of the minority, and he gets to take advantage of the federal funds that are allocated for MDBA contracts, and that's both on a state level as well as a federal level. So that's my very point, that these policies are nothing but universal policies, and they're not specific. So I don't know what they have to do with Tulsa. What does any of what he said has anything to do with Tulsa in terms of solutions or outcomes? And that's my point, that we're dealing with a person who has not done the work to show that he is a changed person from 40 years ago. To me, Biden is the exact same person. You know, he's just shined the shit a little harder. But it's the same, you know, it's like you say, when you shine shit, still shit. So, you know, for me, so I do think that it's a PR stunt. I think that it is an opportunity to put some, you know, to build up some political capital, looking down at a 2020 is Biden, whether it is Kamala, but I believe it's just a political, you know, political capital to build up for, so that he can say, hey, look, black people, this is what I've done for you. You know, I've done more for you than Trump did. As you know, Trump once said, I did more for you than Obama did. And the fact that you had to actually think about that was a dangerous efficacy of that statement alone. The fact that you could actually challenge that statement and have a full-on like supported argument for both sides of that argument really was all he needed to even say, I've taken you farther than, you know, the first black president in history. You know, so that's the way I see it. That's the way I see his quote unquote yeah, that he mentioned at the speech. But you know, to me, it has nothing to do with Tulsa. It has nothing to do with black people. You know, yeah, couldn't even acknowledge the descendants of Tulsa in terms of reclaiming land like California did as of recently, a few months ago. He was Boyd. In the history of this country, over I believe over 1,000 communities. So whether that's whole towns, whether it's entire cities, whether it's entire neighborhoods, that Black people have started over the last 300 years and have been racially cleansed through white violence. And Boynton was simply one evidence of that. How the state really took their land from them, and thankfully, due to reps like Shirley Weber, my apologies, and shout out to Shirley Weber, who helped push the reparations bill through California state legislature, and but as a part of that, I think a part of that domino effect, reclaim Boynton to the proper family because their descendants are still living, and prime piece of real estate near Manhattan Beach, prime piece of real estate as well. So, in other words, he couldn't even, work out some deal like that where we see in real time, in other words, what it would look like to at least help the descendants reclaim some of that was taken from them and was destroyed to help rebuild the community itself, not just doling out, federal contracts for everybody. I mean, I don't get how you award everyone else because guess what? The descendants of those that murdered and burned down Tulsa, guess what? They're still here too. So, and if they have a business, guess what they get to do? They get to also partake in the same federal fund. Yeah. So, you tell me where that makes sense that you award the perpetrators and you award to say, hey, your pawpaw killed some folks, burned down their land. So, since we didn't get to imprison him, we're going to award you some federal contracting to increase your household wealth that's already 17 times larger than the family that you murdered and, and whose land you took. But, maybe that's just a cynic in me. But that's my thoughts on it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I have to put in a disclaimer here. I was country when country wasn't cool. I was country when country wasn't cool. Me and Tammy went that. I'm so country. I really am. I have to admit it. And I was a kid who would watch. They would have. When I was growing up, they only had like 3 channels: ABC, CBS, and NBC, and they would market the Wizard of Oz for like a month. A big deal. And so my older cousins would, to get to stay at my grandma's house because they can't, you can stay up past 9 o'clock and watch the Wizard of Oz. They've been marketing it to you for a month. 3 weeks, the Wizard of Oz. 2 weeks, the Wizard of Oz. 2 days, the Wizard of Oz comes on. So you watch the Wizard of Oz, and this booming voice comes over the speaker. Gonna get Dorothy and the Wizard. Gonna get Dorothy and the Lion. All these people. At the end of the movie, it's a midget, and you're like, so anticlimactic, right?
Yeah.
And you argue in school about what that wasn't really a wizard. That was a bad ending. So next year I watched it again, the exact same ending. It took me like 4 or 5 years to realize this is really the wizard. You know what I mean? This is not. They're not fooling you. This is really who he is. Yeah. And so I never, when I heard Biden was going to Tulsa, Black Wall Street, I was like, wow, he's going to get his reparations. Wow, good for him. I didn't even really pay much attention to it. And then I actually looked at the speech. I'm like, where are the reparations? I thought Biden was going to give these people reparations. Everybody would make a big deal of him going there. Like, They were
Yeah.
showing the last known survivors and whatever.
Right.
And
Right. Right.
he basically spoke about his plan to help black ownership, to build black home ownership. That's where a lot of wealth is built to
Hmm.
help to make sure that the value of black homes didn't fall below the value of white homes, even in nearby neighborhoods, and make sure that African Americans didn't pay more insurance costs for homes and automobiles, which is a good endeavors, but that really didn't have anything to do with Tulsa. I don't think he should be given pat on the head for that. To be honest with you, but he didn't offer these people any reparations. I thought he was going to give. Why go to Black Wall Street and not give them reparations? I think he thought it was a big deal that he was actually acknowledging Black Wall Street. That I'm the first president to come out here in
President.
100 years.
Yeah.
He said
Yep.
that. Like it was sort of performative. I'm like, is this real? And then he started saying stuff like, we want to fill the silence. That people have been silenced for 100 years, and we want to fill the silence. And acknowledging Black Wall Street and what happened could maybe lead to healing. At some point, he got an applause during his speech. I don't know who,
Yeah.
and he was acknowledging that there were three known survivors from Black Wall Street, and he acknowledged them and so on and so forth, which was nice. But I assumed he was going to give these people reparations. And just for those who don't know, I mean, I've actually been to Tulsa several times. I've been to Black Wall Street and visited the area. I've heard the story that there was actually a young black guy, young white woman. I think the story goes they actually had win a relationship,
Hmm.
and I'm not sure the town really knew about it. And then when they
Right.
found out, all hell broke loose. They were gonna string the kid up, and so some
Yep.
black men came down there to protect him. And then some white men showed up, and it was like maybe over 1,000 white men, maybe 75 black men. A shootout happened, and the blacks retreated to the Greenwood section of Tulsa,
Right.
which is known as Black Wall Street. And those riots happened. There were like at least 1,500, a mob of like 1,500, at least thousands of white men. Burned down over 1,200 homes, destroyed another 200, burned down the whole area. The
Right.
Burned down a library, a school, a couple newspapers, a church. It was about a 35-block radius that Black Wall Street took up, and the story has it was a basically black town. It was very black section of Tulsa. It was thriving, and the problem was that it kept spreading. It spread out a little bit each year, and so the white people in town really wanted to destroy the place anyway, and they used this relationship between this young black guy and a young white woman as an excuse. So you're gonna
Hmm.
hang this young black guy. They won't let you you're gonna burn down over 1,200 homes. That's your reaction to that. They were firebombed. There were bombs. I mean, gasoline bombs dropped from private planes. First bombs have been dropped on U.S. soil. It had to happen in a black neighborhood, of course. Um, so, and after the dust was settled, I think the official count was like maybe 36 people died, 10 black, 10 white, and 26 white. But ultimately, there was like a mass grave of a couple hundred black people.
Hmm.
So the official count, I mean, the actual people who died was count, and they're still digging people by those graves. Um,
I
I
believe
think,
it's up to 300, right?
yeah, at least, and there there were like maybe 6,000 people who were, I guess, in camps or whatever that was being guarded by the National Guard,
Mm.
who were basically homeless. Um, that's pretty much the story of Black Wall Street, and they really want an excuse to burn down that area anyway, and they used this relationship with this young black guy and this young white woman as an excuse. So uh, I think these people deserve reparations. I think in the past, I think they've been offered like $1 million for like education or something. But I think they originally demanded 1 million for everybody who lost homes, or lost property in Black Wall
Mm.
Street. They reached out to the mayor. I think they kind of blown them off about reparations. I think when Biden left, I think people were still complaining that at least the three surviving members should receive reparations. So it kind of begs the question: if you can't get reparations for Black Wall Street, when we know what happened, we know it was unfair, we know it was disenfranchisement, and we actually can tally up the people who were involved and who own property, own land, own business. Know that we actually have the people on record. How can you get reparations for Black folks for slavery when it would take um, a few actuaries in the accounting firm of Ernst and Young to figure who should get paid for that? Like who are descendants of slaves, who's been disenfranchised since slavery, after I mean during slavery, after slavery, because it's been so much longer. You know what I'm saying? So much, which
Right.
are we moved from slavery, like a couple hundred years, where Tulsa is only 100 years, and they actually have people names on record. So you can't get reparations for Black Wall Street. How can you get reparations for slavery, which ADOS and people have been pushing for? So, but it was pretty much a PR stunt, and it seemed like it was very performative. I'm the first president to come out here in 100 years, and I guess for the Greenwood, I guess the Greenwood Center, it's a center in Greenwood where he spoke. Maybe they got some money out of it. Maybe the center received some money, and maybe the prestige of having the president come out here. But I'm trying to figure out, what did the Black people from Tulsa receive from that, other than a pat on the head and some acknowledgement?
Hmm.
What's probably going to end up happening is that you're going to see books come out about Black Wall Street, some movies come out about Black Wall Street, but you may have some Black people in front, but ultimately it's going to be a big a big
Mm.
movie house or publishing house, or whoever's going to make the lion's share of the money off of these people's story, because now it's becoming like a national news and becoming mainstream to talk about Black Wall Street. But I think that young people, millennials, are looking for different ways to move forward, and looking for different models, because I think the Obama administration gave us the Black exceptionalism. Obama's a Black exceptional. You be more exceptional, you can be just like Obama or LeBron or Serena. I think we're seeing now that's not working. This Black
No.
exceptionalism isn't working. It was a trick bag to begin with. I don't think anybody feels the Black community is better off after Obama. Um, so now I think people are looking for different models. I think one model is to go back to the Black Wall Streets of the world during Reconstruction, when Black folks owned their own towns. These people were darn near geniuses. They had to be, because they had to sort of do for self. They had no other choice. Um, Maybe it's a bit of nostalgia on my part, because uh, integration, um, and the fact that when the country became more integrated, blacks abandoned a lot of their own businesses to go into white spaces, and
Mm.
sort of this concept of supporting black businesses and creating a black ecosystem is almost like foreign to us now. And we
Yeah.
talked about this before, but it just may be kind of like waiting for Godot. But I think, my opinion, maybe people in Tulsa feel differently, but I think it was, I think it was a travesty that Joe Biden went out there and didn't offer those people any reparations. I would rather him not have gone, to be honest with you, than to use Tulsa as a PR stunt, and as a Tulsa as a way to, as a platform to talk about his programs for all. And I think it's a signal when you talk about the anti-Asian hate crime. I think it's a signal to should be a signal to Black people, to anybody who's listening, that Joe Biden, like you said, Joe Biden is setting himself up for 2024, when he wants to create as much goodwill amongst all people, blacks, uh, Asians, women, so on and so forth. If when he runs for reelection, or Kamala Harris runs for reelection, from what I understand, that after he got elected, I think black folks were asking, um, so what do we get for getting you elected? I think he basically told them that, uh, we barely won. The message, we barely won. So I thought we were gonna win by a landslide. You really didn't do your job, because we barely won. all the efforts that we made to get rid of Trump. And now it's a new world now where blacks are not the majority minority anymore. I think we second place to the Hispanic community. So we're not the
Mm-hmm.
majority minority anymore. So I don't think he
Yep.
necessarily has to cater to us, as if the Democratic Party was catering it to us to begin with. I think he feels like he gave us what we asked for. Um, we wanted to resist Trump. That's what we wanted. He resisted Trump for us, so we should be happy. And now he has to form coalitions with as many people as he can. He already has the black vote anyway. All he has to do is to resist Trump, and black folks are going to vote for him. If he's reelected, we're gonna, holler and scream, and we're gonna celebrate him again for resisting Trump. But I think he needs to. I think he's trying to form coalitions with as many people as he possibly can. The Asian community, Hispanic, so on and so forth, for his if he wants to get reelected, or for Kamala Harris running for president. But again, I was country, and country wasn't cool. I thought Biden was going to offer those people reparations. It didn't happen, and I don't know why I would have thought otherwise. We talked about Biden, his mask at the masquerade party. I think he's revealing who he
Mm-hmm.
really is. That he's a survivalist, and he'll say or do whatever he has to get elected or get reelected. And during that speech, he also talked about how the Klan was started. He made it seem like the Klan was started toward the efforts of immigrants, like himself, Catholics who were coming to the country, and there were a lot of
Right, right.
Americans who felt that they were gonna be a battle between Catholics and they needed to save Christianity. So the Klan was started to thwart the efforts of Irish immigrants and Italian immigrants who were Catholic. And I'm thinking, like, I can't believe he said that with a straight face. So he seemed
Yeah.
to be kind of like, just saying things that are ahistorical, that totally make no sense whatsoever. And this seems like the Biden who I think the Democratic Party and the Republican all along, but I think the public hasn't really been aware of him as we should have been. Um, so that's my take on
Yeah. I mean,
Wall
you brought
Street.
up
It
a.
was nothing but a PR stunt.
No, man. I mean, you brought up a couple of good points. One that I think really stands out for me is the idea. I guess really 2 points. One, this generation, whether you want to call them or I think my generation, I think that's your generation as well, Gen X. Uh, um, where there's this call back to the past. And in our combos, even offline, we always gotta look back. Look back. Have we seen this before? What made the difference then versus now? Is there some? Are we bringing forward the lessons that were learned 20, 30, 80 years ago? In other words, I am a big believer that history does repeat itself. Uh, so that that's why I look back as often as I do to the past, because I am of the mindset that we as just humans, I don't think we're fundamentally that different uh, than even 500 years ago. That we tend to make some of the in terms of what motivates us, whether it's fear or gain, the things that are important to us, our own lives, our family. Those are the things that motivate the same decision to put food in our bellies, put clothes on our backs, and roofs over our head. I think large that has changed is the hindrances that we're able to accomplish those basic needs, um, the also the access to be able to accomplish those much faster, maybe a little bit more fluid. So technology within communication systems, advancements, even the fact that you and I are chatting over a over an internet that didn't exist when Tulsa was around, using a format that didn't even exist just 15 years ago. So, we are, aware of those nuances. But with that being said, they still haven't really changed the way that we make decisions in terms of what motivates us, and what's important to us as humans. So I think it does make sense. In other words, like all of that, I think it makes sense to look back to the past. So I am in agreement with just the idea of looking back, to a history that's less, maybe less known, not taught as popular, and certainly not through public education systems with any consistency, when it comes to Black history in this country. Um, you know, a significant amount of us within the Black community, more than Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, George Washington Carver, Booker T. Washington, kind of some of the same six people that you, growing up. I think most of us, when we first learn that, we have a depth and wealth of history and contributions, even to our everyday lives, it was outside of the public education system. So whether it was, within our own personal interactions, households, or just kind of searching, whether it's in college or doing our own research. And that's where we come across stories like O.W. Gurley, who was the gentleman for first getting the 40 acres to build Greenwood. To even realize, like, wow, there are folks, that men and women, who were starting entire cities, that were starting entire Black towns, then, and to, easily be inspired that if they can do it during a time that we had, especially during Reconstruction, just come out of slavery, you already have Jim Crow well into effect before they became the actual Jim Crow laws. But in other words, you still had this heightened period of anti-Black hate and just all-out racism, where there wasn't even an attempt necessarily to mask the racism. There was no incentive, like, for what? Why hide it? So in other words, still push through what seems to be insurmountable odds, and to be inspired by that history, to say, well, if they can do it, then we collectively should be able to do it again. However, within that, one of the things that I think we sometimes look are the I guess just the details, so to speak, where one, a lot of the the KKK was larger then than it is now. So, white supremacy is waning, and Black people, you have all this advancement, and you're in better positions now, and much to your point, Black exceptionalism. Everybody can be the Obamas now. You have the opportunity. It's just about, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Stop sagging, stop using ebonics, straighten your hair, and you too can, be a part of the American exceptionalism. And that's where it falls apart, because even the untold side to Tulsa is that while it was considered Black Wall Street, that the largest population amongst Black Wall Street still lived in poverty. It was not this Like the roads were not brick, or the road, well, they actually weren't brick, but are paved with gold. Where,
Mhm.
like not every black person was wealthy, even by those standards. The large majority of them were still poor and impoverished. When it took the uh, essentially the um, the redistribution of Gurley's wealth, in other words, and that's really the larger point, is that it took the redistribution of Gurley's wealth to kind of create, even before we had the term middle class, but to create a black middle class amongst Greenwood and Black Wall Street. So if it weren't for the redistribution of his wealth, then that black middle class and that Black Wall Street story would not have existed. It would not have been what it is today. And that's what I mean by some of the details. So even within the stories of what seems like on the surface, it aligns with the idea of uh, black capitalism, American exceptionalism, that quite often that's not true. Like, it doesn't even to the image. Um, so I think it's important for us to, not only one, the distinctions, those nuances,
Right.
as well. And the other point was that integration, kind of the impacts of integration. Is that something that I think a lot about, and quite often look to outcomes. And I think I think for me personally, the first sign that this idea, that we've progressed, I think just the general thing that's taught is civil rights movement. It kind of got rid of a lot of the racism in the country, and we were able to finally be free to live our lives. And now, look at the progress we've made, later, and it's all due to integration. And Martin Luther King comes out as the he. And one of the first things that made me think that, is that accurate, was Howard. Being on, I won't mention any names, but if anybody that's familiar with Howard's campus was definitely familiar with Sankofa, the bookstore that's across the street from the campus, on Georgia Ave. Shouts out to Sankofa. Uh, um, but there were some professors in there, some long tenured professors in there, and had an argument with provost. Because some of the professors were largely not being paid, and that they had received paychecks. Um, and, just kind of like the contents of that argument, and it really kind of spilled over. It was a very heated argument. And what shocked me was the response by provost, who all but said they should be thankful almost to even have jobs, although they weren't getting paid for those jobs. Mind was Howard, because if we remember, Howard was harder to get into than Harvard. Howard's history, when we talk about HBCUs and we think about HBCUs, I'm sure the Hampton listeners, want to fight me.
The real
But
HU, the real HU.
yeah, a southern, the real HU, but the friendly rivalries notwithstanding, thinking in black people, when we talk about HBCUs and kind of the pinnacle of HBCU. Howard sits at the top of that thought, and rightfully so. But the thing that conversation and that argument revealed, that how can these decades later, our arguably most prized tertiary institution is struggling to pay bills, and can't even pay professors, can't attract talent because they can't even afford to pay the professors that are there. When you go into the Founders Library, when you go into essentially the remaining campus and you look at the conditions of Howard, you wouldn't even realize, like, it, you know, I remember going inside one of the science labs, and the thing it reminded me of is why am I blanking on the movie with Joe Clark?
Not
Lean
Crazy
on Me.
Joe Clark.
Yeah,
Crazy
yeah.
Joe.
Remember the movie Lean on Me? You know, the condition of the school. Like, that's what it reminded me of. And it's just like being in being actually in the classroom. And it's like, it reminded me of Lean on Me.
So what year
Like,
what year
wow,
what year
how
what
can
years
this-
were you there?
So I actually wasn't a student. I always considered
I mean,
myself an honorary.
When you went, what years were you hanging around?
Exactly, right.
Because my sister graduated from Howard like in 1993.
Okay, so I was
Tell me you came after.
like the types. So I would have been after her.
Okay. She graduated in
That
1993.
like I was probably say I was like running around campus, Howard's campus, like 96.
Okay.
Yeah, like 96, 97, running around Howard's campus.
Yeah, but the lifeblood of any college is really gonna be the alumni, and if they're gonna send their children to Howard. Because when I was living in
Oh,
DC,
correct.
there were so many. I would meet everybody and all the African Americans who lived in. I was meeting in DC went to Howard.
Of course, yes. That's
And
100%
they would tell
true.
you I'm a second generation
Yep.
Howard student. My grandfather went to Howard.
Right.
So they were real proud about that. So that's how I
Rightfully
remember
so.
it.
Yeah.
But so it seems like the lifeblood of those institutions are going to be, are going to be the students. So I guess what you're pointing out is that maybe blacks on Howard, like they were doing segregation.
There you go.
They've kind of abandoned it. That's a good point. I think the other thing is that a lot of the integration meant the integration of consumers, but not businesses. If you look at even like the Major League Baseball,
the Negro League.
You start siphoning off the players. You basically slowly bleeding out the Negro Leagues, because some of those Negro League teams could have played in the major leagues.
Oh, 100%. Some of them were better.
They didn't do anybody any favors by just letting Jackie Robinson and a couple Negro League players go to the major leagues. And there were some blacks back then who even ran newspapers who thought that was a good thing. That was the price of integration, to prove that blacks could compete with whites in baseball. We were smart as them. That we could run the bases, and we could we knew situations on the baseball field. Back then people said that blacks weren't as smart as whites.
Right.
Because you play the game from an intellectual standpoint, and some people felt that to prove we could compete with whites in maybe in the classroom or on the baseball field, that was the reward of integration. The price of integration may have been the death knell of the Negro Leagues, where we lose all those businesses and all those jobs. And we had the benefit of hindsight. So, you know what I'm saying? We had the benefit of hindsight. So
right.
That's something else I'd like to say. But you have the concept of integration, how things are going to get better. But then you also have Carter G. Woodson, where he writes about the
Miseducation of the Negro.
where you have we're talking about black ecosystem, but not everybody feels that way. Some
Right.
people just feel like some people want benefit from the ecosystem but don't want to pay into it. And he's talking about how blacks a lot of times act as individuals. They want to benefit from the black community, build businesses from the black community, and first when they get up on their feet, move to a white neighborhood, talk about how well they made it. Then
That's absolutely it.
you see that a lot, and so you have a lot of this individualism. I see it a lot in New York, and from that standpoint, I really don't think there is a black. I mean, maybe because I live in New York, I don't know, but I don't really see like necessarily a black in us when it comes to business per se. I think you have New York who wants to look how I made it, and a lot of urban areas want to say, look how I made it, look what I did, but they're not. I won't say not giving back, but they're not necessarily part of an ecosystem, and I don't even think it's their mindset. You look at all the black people who live in New York. You, typical person, if you ask them they want to be a part of something, they're trying to figure out how they're gonna copy it, how they're gonna steal it. You know what I'm saying? Just like so. My point I'm trying to make is that it seems simple, but whoever had those businesses in Black Wall Street, they also had customers, and they also had
Correct.
people who had natural proclivity to patronize black businesses and wanting to be in black spaces. I tell people all the time, like look at when I was in high school and college, you had like Spike Lee, Robert Townsend, Kenan Ivory Wayans, all these young were risking it all to make their own movies, but we were rewarding those movies. We knew what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
We respected it, and they were telling our story. Our story's being told by us, and we respected it. And I went to some of the
Yeah.
movies 2 or 3 times. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure
Yeah.
out. I'm trying to figure out. I mean, I'm talking about from my own perspective, as from an artist standpoint, that I feel like I'm more like the Invisible Man, in that example what Ralph Ellison wrote decades ago. You can be seen and unseen simultaneously,
Mm-hmm.
where even black folks don't see you until you've been acknowledged by society. Where in my generation we were acknowledging Spike Lee and Robert Townsend and Kenan Ivory Wayans, so on and so forth. And to some extent, Eddie Murphy. I know he put a lot of people on too, and created a lot of jobs for blacks. That's how you grow jobs.
Yeah.
You don't grow jobs by creating something. You're here, and then it's a plantation behind you, some big studio behind you, or some big
Mm.
publishing house behind you. Spike Lee and Kenan Ivory Wayans, those guys were creating jobs. Robert Townsend were creating jobs. That's how you create jobs.
Well, I mean, I think that speaks to the point that there is I think kind of two phenomena are happening simultaneously. So even like if you take that point of let's just say the mid '80s, really like 93, 94, where you have this rising tide that happened culturally through our community. So you have visibility in hip hop, you have rising visibility in media and films, you have rising within fashion, where there was this. I think we really took up the message. In other words, let's say like, okay, now the previous generation, a lot of those folks were born on the cusp of civil rights or right after civil rights. So you have that was raised with a messaging that now you can kind of partake in the American dream. That's what the goal of the civil rights movement was an equal opportunity to partake within the opportunities themselves. Although the outcome may differ, but wanted an equal chance to be able to participate within the economy be able to participate within home ownership, education, and essentially build a life. We wanted to equally have the opportunities that white counterparts had to build a sustainable life. So you have this generation that is growing up on the messaging that now you have an opportunity. Now you have this opportunity. Take it, run with it. You can be a part of the American dream. You mentioned Spike, and I think out of everyone you mentioned, Spike is will probably arguably be the most patriotic. Spike, uh, his movies revolve around Americana. Always has the flag. The relationship of Black people in America is the center thesis of all of his films. But he's arguably the most patriotic as well. He probably wraps himself in the flag, in the American flag. He's actually done it a few times. So, point being is that, the message was heard and it was taken up. But then you have this gap between, the 80s to the early 90s, where, and at least for me, because I was a hip hop head, I guess still consider myself a old hip hop head at this point. So for me, the transition was more evident in hip hop, where the messages within hip hop, and primarily rap, went from a social awareness, or kind of the majority of messages went from a social awareness to more, I've made it. I made it from poverty, essentially from nothing, and made it to something. And arc, in other words, of Black wealth being attained through entertainment. I think we talked about it probably online, certainly offline, where you have the Oprahs and the ball players, and all of it is still entertainment. It's still a form of entertainment. So you have this Black upper middle class to high net worth individuals that are making it through entertainment. But then when that generation has children,
right.
The social outcomes have declined. How is it that we have post civil rights, we have integration, but our and the other HBCUs, because if Howard, which is a part of my point, if Howard, whose accreditation has been threatened several times, funding has fell through, attendance has deeply declined over the decades. They've even had to convert the East-West Towers into private housing, simply to be able to keep the doors open. What of the Lincoln Universities? What of, essentially the lesser known HBCUs?
Right.
What are they experiencing if Howard, which is the pinnacle, is experiencing these type of declines? So in other words, we're seeing our institutions declining. We're seeing home ownership within our community declining. We've seen land ownership. The Atlantic did a story of comparing home ownership, Black land ownership, looking back 1916, was either 1916 or 1918 to 100 years forward. Can't recall if the article was written in 2016, but the point being is that Black land ownership was, I believe, at one of the land in this country, and has since declined to less than 1/2 of 1%. 100 years later. So when we talk
well, some
about
of
the
those.
outcomes of integration, and we have this generation, I think, seeing that, like this kind of newer generation, seeing the outcomes, like, well, wait, these two things aren't matching. If you're saying integration was a good thing, but there's declines economically within our community, then something must be amiss.
Well,
And I think that's
I
what's
mean,
causing that recall.
no,
Go ahead.
the financial crisis wiped out a lot of stuff that I don't think people.
100%.
But I think someone's just showing studies. I mean, I think the financial crisis would have hurt home ownership for a lot of people if they hadn't been the government printing money and giving it to certain people like that. The financial crisis
Yeah,
should have
well,
wiped out
no,
a lot of people.
but no,
So,
that's 100%. But also, our community is arguably still climbing out of that hole.
oh yeah, of course,
Whereas almost every other community has climbed out of that hole and has repaired.
of course,
And that's the
of course.
difference, and that's what we're talking about. So even
So
when
rising tides don't lift all boats. Right?
exactly, that's absolutely it. Trickle
Right.
down economics is not one. I've never understood the upset, like, why that was ever a good thing. Like, even the term itself, trickle down. Like, why would you want to? Like, do you
It came from
drink from a
Reagan.
trickle?
I think it came from
Right, I
Reagan.
understand
I think it came
where
from
it came
Reagan.
from, but
So
it,
you know the
it's
trick
just
bag.
the idea, like do you drink from like, or do you want a whole gulp? So even the marketing
Yeah.
of the idea of trickle down economics, I was like, that never made sense to me.
Right,
So
but
certainly looking at
people
the
kept talking about it and they kept latching onto it. And it was like, this doesn't make sense. But then at the point became it only doesn't make sense to black folks. So it's like
right, there you go. So
that became
yeah, I think we see this gap, and I think that explains some of the gap that we're seeing. But one of the things that like the idea of a black ecosystem, there are more black businesses today in this country than the history of this country. We have more black owned businesses. And there's quite often this message which relates to Black Wall Street, because a part of the learning of Black Wall Street, and I think that inspiration of looking back at history, like, oh my God, why we didn't learn this? Like, why no one taught us this? And like that, just kind of that galvanizing of learning about your own self and your community. It's exciting. It's eye-opening, but at the same time, it kind of sparks this false belief that, oh, all we have to do is replicate. We just open businesses. Like, business is the key to our
right.
success.
You have to have customers.
But
You have to have
when
customers too. So.
it's like when we look at the fact that there are over, depending on what you're looking at, but let's just call it 6 to 8 million black-owned businesses. Meanwhile, over 91% of them are non-employee firms, meaning that these are not job-creating entities. So the idea that business will just change the landscape clearly is not true. It's not. Like, we've listened to that message. Enough people have taken it, run with it. Meanwhile, it has not changed the direction of our community at all. So the idea that most folks are inspired with, and this idea, we talk about financial literacy, but the idea that's kind of getting pushed around is that, like, financial literacy is the savior. All we have to do is become financial literate as a community, and that inspiration. And to me, I do think all literacy in all of its forms, the financial or otherwise, will always be relevant. but at the same time, financial literacy for the Black community is like a wallet. It's like, well, what good is me having a wallet if there's no money in it?
Right, right,
I can learn
right.
a wallet. I can learn how to build, how to construct a wallet. I can put it in different, leather, Velcro, satin. I can get fancy with it. I can get basic with it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's still a wallet.
That's sort of my point. That's sort of my point about
Yeah.
The businesses. You starting a businesses, so you started a business. So what? With no customer base. And
Exactly.
you got a ready-made customer base during segregation. I think blacks were more open to your business, and
Well, we had to be,
right,
because
if
you
look
couldn't
at
take your.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, but I'm saying if you
no,
talk
just
about all the black wealth, all these people with all this black wealth and entertainers and athletes, are they having this type of conversation we're having?
I think
they're
the
trying to figure out how they can.
generation.
I think they're trying to figure out how they can hoard more,
generation
how they can hoard more capital, how they can hoard even more money, how they can get on the Forbes.
I think they're. When I say younger, as if I'm not a part of that generation, in the sense that at least the folks that come to mind for me, like Marshawn Lynch, who has been an outspoken uh, NFL player, that would be along those lines. These conversations, you are seeing it, with LeBron's generation, which is a bit younger than me, but not crazy, not a crazy far off difference.
But I live in Brooklyn.
But the point is, I think we are seeing the conversations happening. Like, what can we, like even with Ice Cube, where
right.
he made the big three happen. Like, he took that, and that's our generation.
I think those are like those are kind of ice. Those like drops in the bucket relative to the number of people who have wealth. I think, for instance, I live in Brooklyn. We had a Brooklyn Nets here. People would think that all the time. You don't even see them in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, like not that you should, but I'm saying, like, you don't, like, they just work here. They just work here.
Right.
And maybe that's more of a Southern thing or whatever, because LeBron's from the Midwest, from Cleveland, so I think he has a little more of a different mentality. I don't think that's the norm per se, but I think what you're seeing a lot of times. The reason I brought the Greenwood Center, is that what it's called, that Biden went to?
Yeah.
So Biden goes to Black Wall Street, his agenda, and you have maybe some employees at the Greenwood Cultural Center maybe benefit from it, and they're gonna promote. Oh, that's a good thing that Biden came here because it benefits that cultural center. You follow what I'm saying?
Right. No,
I think that's the scenario. I think that's the scenario you have a lot of times when you have black careerists, people who are promoting their own career at the expense of 40. I wouldn't say at the expense, but they're promoting their career over 40 million black people. You follow what I'm saying? That you have this concept. This concept. I mean, towards the art world, where you have these artists who always kind of connected to some big magazine, some big newspaper, or some big institution, and you may have 2 or 3 blacks at the institution who aren't the janitor.
Yeah.
We're celebrating these people, but behind the scenes, it's just that 1 or 2 black people who are benefiting from it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think that's that. Yeah.
So I think we're more careerists over what I call an ecosystem, and they're not gonna do anything to jeopardize their career. Not that they should, but we're promoting careerists and not a collective. I think, if that makes sense.
Well, I think
the reason I bring that up is because there's again, I think I mentioned it before. There's a something called a mode museum in Prince Edward County, Virginia, where I'm from, and this museum is owned by, it's not necessarily black owned, but they put, whenever you hear about Prince Edward County, it's always this museum always gets mentioned, and it's just a bunch of careerists, but doesn't benefit necessarily the black, just that institution. You feel what I'm saying?
Right. I do. I 100% get it. That was really my point as well. Even like my critiques on Biden's policy, same critique that I had, and I always forget the young lady's name, but I so admire her when Kamala was, doing her presidential run, and interview with a young black journalist for the Griot. And this is where this young lady, pushed her on the question of not only reparations, but, policies specific for the black community. And this is where, at least the first time I recall hearing Kamala talk about her LIFT Act, which was simply a tax credit for families making dollars. And the young lady, I'm going to get her name so I can give her proper credit, because I just admired the fact that she didn't simply listen to Kamala explain the LIFT Act, again, which was just simply a tax credit for every family that made less than 100. Right. And her response was, so you don't have any policies that
specifically going to benefit
the black community.
Right. But this is an example of a career. I mean, like, yeah, 40 million black folks celebrating Kamala Harris, but it's benefiting for her career, benefiting Obama's personal career, but it's not benefiting 40 million black people.
Because how does it make sense
that you acknowledge slavery? You acknowledge that black people were the only ones to be enslaved. You acknowledge Jim Crow. You acknowledge essentially decades, although slavery ended. But there was another century of state-sanctioned terrorism. Let's be clear. The government, on both the state level and the federal level, were terrorists to the black community, and were terrorizing the black community. So you acknowledge that. Like Kamala has acknowledged that. Biden has acknowledged that. And you tell black folks that you acknowledge it. So what you're going to do is reward white people with a tax credit for your enslavement, for the continuation of your state-sanctioned terrorizing. We're going to give them a tax credit. It's like, what? How does that make sense? But the point is, like, we're seeing this again. In other words, like, to me, when I listen to Biden,
yeah, so I think we may have lost Torian for a minute, but as far as okay, he's back.
Hey, sorry about that. I think
So I think we lost you for a minute. You're back. So you were
saying
yeah.
I think it booted me out. But yeah, I was saying that when I listen to Biden talk about his policy, his upcoming policy implementations, I just heard Kamala again talk about a tax credit, essentially a universal policy. Same thing even with Cory Booker, run with the baby bonds. Those baby bonds were not specific to the black community. Like, so how does it close the racial wealth gap if you're giving the same demographic that you're talking about catching up. Like, that's what a gap is. It's an acknowledgement that one is ahead, one is behind.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying, well, we need to fill this gap. So you acknowledge that a gap exists. You acknowledge that we're going to try to get the folks that are behind, and the reason that they're behind, we acknowledge. They're behind because we were enslaved. We were specifically barred from FHA loans as a result of the New Deal because of redlining, because of legislation. We were specifically barred. That's what created this gap. So not because we were too stupid, not because we were too weak, not because we were too dumb to be able to implement and this idea of bootstrapping your way, because there's not a white family in this country that has ever bootstrapped from chattel slavery in this country. Period. None.
Right.
Not
You
one
look at most of the
single
people.
one.
You look at
So
most of the people who've done well. A lot of businesses, they did it with being clicked up with the government, either government contracts
100%.
or even some big institution. And nobody's ever.
So
But they give us this with this this
right, with this idea
pull
that
yourself up by your own bootstraps. They hit us
exactly
over the head with that.
right. So in other words, we acknowledge that. Like, politicians acknowledge that, but then you reward the same descendants, and in some cases the same people. You know, we like when we move forward from slavery, you know, just like folks that are still alive, there are survivors of Tulsa. Guess what? Has anyone looked to see if there were survivors that perpetrated the crimes? Survivors that murdered these people?
Well, I
Just
think
like, you know,
yeah,
just like
they know.
Germany.
They know.
And
They know in Tulsa. They know who perpetrated. I think
but
they've
that's my
also.
point. That where's the tribunal? Well, where is the tribunal? The same way that Germany put together a tribunal to catch people that participated as Nazis, and no matter how old these people are, no matter how, you know, you got folks walking in that can barely crane their neck up because they've lived to their 90s. They're on oxygen, on life support. Guess what? You still getting tried for human rights violations. So where is the tribunal that even brings justice for the folks that have participated in these crimes? And it's not just Tulsa. It has been nationwide. And that's my point, is that you acknowledge that these things happen, but then you reward the same people and their descendants.
Right.
Because these folks are still walking planet Earth.
Well, I actually
Their
looked
children
at
are walking planet Earth. Their grandchildren are walking planet Earth. And you're talking about giving them baby bonds and tax credits and things that are, if you're saying that it's going to take us 150 years to reach the point where the white community is now in terms of household wealth, but then you still give them the same tools for us to catch up, for them to speed bump a little ahead. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's nonsensical.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, this is the thing. Like, that's what I heard with Biden when I listened to him talk, is that, well, we're just going to make more universal policies because these folks, to your point earlier, you know, where's the bite? There is no recourse of action in terms of consequence. You can ignore the Black community. What is the consequence of ignoring our community? What's the consequence? What is the political consequence? What is the legislative consequence? What is the judicial consequence of ignoring our community? And time again, and really, and I would argue to say, post-civil rights, our collectivism has been even weaker in the sense that there is no recourse for ignoring the collectivism that we do practice.
Right.
You know, and I give an example, the thing that still blows my mind. I believe it was the AP News as well as the New York Times that estimated, Black Lives Matter marches over the last year post George Floyd, 100 million. on the low end, 250 million on the high end. You know, just a reminder, there's a little less than 400 million people, according to the most recent census in this country. So you're telling me minimally a third of the country, a third across race and class divisions collectively came to heard. And yet and still you have a president in off that one stated. So we can't even say that we didn't know before he got in office. It was not a bait and switch. First of all, you pick someone who has a 48-year track record. So that's number one. Biden, to me, has been the exact same person the whole time. I don't think he's ever pretended or even need to kind of switch it up to a large degree. Like, he's been that.
Right. Exactly.
The language has changed, but he's been who he has been the entire time. And then he stated, not only am I not going to defund the police, the very problems that a third of the country has identified as part of the problem. And you're saying, well, I'm not even going to change the problem. I'm going to fund the problem even more. I'm going to continue to take money out of education, out of other vital services that are provided through the government, and use that money to increase the funds to the very same people that you have identified as a part of the problem.
Yeah,
he said that before the election, and black people still voted for him. So where's the consequence? Where's the accountability for ignoring our community?
Right, but even with so we one last parting shot. We got 4 minutes. One last parting shot. Even on as far as Black Tulsa is concerned, they went not only where there's no accountability for the people who created this destruction, the blacks were not even about it.
Right.
They were not allowed to talk about it. There were going to be some consequences. So that's off the table as far as who did what to whom. But as far as Biden, I don't really expect him to do much, to be honest with you. He helped us resist Trump, and that's the end of it. That's the end of it. And there's nobody there's nobody who really, again, people who, it's a narrative that people will say things and write things for their career, and they're not telling the truth. They're doing things for their careers. These people in the media, these black folks in the media who had all this energy for Trump, are quiet on Biden. All these black politicians are quiet now after Biden never offered black folks anything. And all the black politicians are quiet. All the black journalists are quiet. The same journalists who had all this energy for Trump. It was a narrative. They repeated a narrative. It had nothing to do with the truth. It has everything to do with the narrative. As far as my last parting shot is this, that black folks deserve a big bag. They deserve a big bag. I went back and looked through reparations. I think the most reparations anybody's gotten has been like maybe $2,500, I think. I think that was for some woman who was tricked into being sold into slavery in some state or something. But most of they call reparations. The state calls reparations. They've offered people some type of education or what have you. But Tulsa deserves a big bag, and you can't get a bag for Tulsa. How can you get a bag for other places or reparations nationally? As far as this black ecosystem, I think a lot of black people who do have wealth, I don't think they're having these conversations. Majority of them are not having these conversations. I think they're more individualists. So we got 2 minutes. Your last parting shot, Torian.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think I probably pretty much said my position. What I certainly think about Biden, it is a PR stunt. It is performative. It to me is just status quo.
Yeah, it sounds like anthropological. Let's go out there, and this is where these people died. This is where this building was burned down. It sounds anthropological.
Right. Yeah. He just kind of took you on a tour to remind you, and then use that as a way to pivot to, well, here's some policy. Here's some universal policies that the people that participated and also benefited. That's the other thing, is that there was a benefit to the destruction of Black Wall Street. And those same folks that got to buy homes as a result of the New Deal, that was predicated also on the death and destruction of Black Wall Street, because guess where they got to put new homes and rebuild using FHA loans and build up the successful businesses that the next 3 generations got to eat off of, so they can all claim that they're, you know, grandpappy bootstrapped and blah blah blah. You know, but there was a benefit there. So, you know, to your point, absolutely agree that there should be reparations even on a state level, that can be immediately put into effect, certain arguably much faster than the federal. You know, we've seen it with North Carolina. We see it with Illinois. We see it with California. So we're living in a time where there are real life examples that states have taken up the torch and are deciding to implement reparations, you know, much faster than the federal government. So yeah, I believe that's really what it's going to take to make whole. And as much as people don't like the word redistribution, but at the same time, guess what? The New Deal was a redistribution of wealth. Like, so, you know, what, 80% of the country wouldn't even be around in its current state if it weren't for the redistribution of wealth, socialist policies that, you know, the big boogeyman likes to run from, you know, but they implement it, and that has been a net positive. So that's what it's going to take to make Black folks in Tulsa and their descendants, no matter where they are. They've decided to up and leave and live in Ghana. Guess what? If you're a descendant of Tulsa, you should benefit from some reparative justice at the end of the day. So yeah, that's my, I guess, parting shot on it.
Okay, so that's been President Biden uses Black Wall Street for a PR stunt. Like thank Mr. Mitchell again for so that's it. Trump and the G. Thanks for watching. See you guys in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Take care.